So before we go into the bombshell news, Jeff, can you describe the state of play already in terms of federal funding uh, for research at Harvard? Because I know obviously there was an effort to freeze some NIH funding, which was blocked. But were any new NIH grants being granted before this all happened?
Yeah. I mean, so what I would say is many of the details of what is happening are not well understood or clear even to many of the participants. So, there was a an episode going back a couple of months ago when the government announced that it was going to cut what's called indirect cost rates on federal grants, NIH grants, from a previous figure that had been determined for each institution to a much lower figure. And they said they were going to do that like overnight, and it would cause a very large reduction in the inflows of cash into all of the institutions. And then that was blocked by a court action, and it still remains in limbo or not yet implemented. But that was the first thing that happened that related to money coming from the government to Harvard and its affiliated hospitals and many other institutions as well. Then there was the second piece of this was several weeks ago when these several government folks sent a letter to the president of Harvard and the head of the Harvard Corporation saying, hey, you will have to do certain things. They gave a general description of what would need to be done. And if they weren't done, $9 billion roughly of grants and contracts over a 5-year period would not be delivered. Okay. And there was no specification of which grants, but it would probably be nearly all of them coming to the Harvard institutions and the affiliated hospitals. Because if you do the math, that's how you can come up with a number of that size. And the first uh, public response to that from President Garber was a statement saying that Harvard was very committed to fighting anti-Semitism, which was given as the primary reason for these actions by the government. And he said that Harvard was doing many things to respond to these issues, and that he looked forward to working with the government to find a way so that the grant suppression would not have to happen. And that he was criticized by some people for that, praised by others. Uh, and then that was kind of in a quiet period until yesterday, when the President Garber, together with well, it was just from President Garber, put out the message to faculty, students, and I don't know how many other groups got the message, in which he linked to a more recent statement from the government that came just the previous Friday. And he said, you got to read this. This is really beyond what is acceptable. And we have decided that we will resist this. Uh, he then also put, again, the things that have been done that Harvard has been doing because they are the right thing to do, uh, but ended up saying, but the things that are said to be required now are not acceptable to us. We cannot agree to that because that would be to essentially take over the university in a manner that is beyond the law, beyond the Constitution, beyond the various statutes that could be employed, and ended up saying, we, of course, want to continue the conversation if you want to talk with us about this. But that's what happened. And then a number of hours after that, the government issued a statement saying, okay, if that's the way you want to be, we're going to immediately, or we will soon, block $2.2 billion of grants. once again, there was no identification of which grants, how they will be blocked, uh, or anything like that. And that's what everyone is trying to figure out right now.
Can you give us an idea of how much scientific and medical research comes out of Harvard? How significant it is in terms of innovation, how many patients it impacts?
Yeah, well, the Harvard institutions combined probably have about $2 billion a year coming to them from NIH between the university, schools, and hospitals and institutes. It's in the range of $2 billion a year. That is the major source of funding for the research carried out by thousands of scientists in these institutions. Harvard is, if it's not the top of all institutions nationally and internationally in the productivity of their research program, in the innovation that comes out of it, in the new company startups that are developed, in the new drugs that come out, in the prizes that are awarded for accomplishment, it's it's either the top one or in an arguable group of the top several. Okay. So if that were all to be withdrawn as funds, it would be an absolute disaster for the research community. Many people are discussing, well, to what extent could various endowments or new gifts substitute for the government support? And the answer is some could be substituted, but a great fraction would not be able to be continued if these were all ended and they stayed suppressed and ended for a substantial period of time. So, um, there are many parts of the university and the hospitals which are telling their faculty, be prepared for stop work orders, and we will be in close contact with you and with our attorneys and with our leaders to figure out what will happen.
Mm.
But there is not a scientist in our community who is not worried that this will happen, and no one can say what exactly the final details will be, but they will not be good for research and for innovation.
Yeah. Have you heard of specific stop work orders? I saw Stat News is reporting that scientist Sarah Fortune, who's focused her work on tuberculosis, got one.
Yeah, so that's one. She went public with that. There are other people who have not wanted to go public for fear that they would then be either further punished. Dan Baruch from the Beth Israel, who heads the Institute for Virology and Vaccine, he was quoted in one of the newspaper articles saying that he received a note that his very major vaccine development research from NIH might be stopped or was stopped. And then there are others that are now starting to be mentioned. I don't think the big statement of millions and millions and millions of dollars of hundreds of investigators being stopped. That hasn't happened as of the last that I looked at my email and my Twitter feed. But there are probably dozens of grants that have been stopped, but they're not immediately getting publicized.
Mhm. So obviously this is a lot of pain with no resolution in sight right now. But
Yeah.
you've a long time advocate of First Amendment rights and freedom of expression. So do you think that President Garber made the right move?
Oh, I think he made the right move because anything other than that would have been a capitulation to, demands that would have undermined any sense of independence academically of Harvard University. Uh, if you read the set of demands, they included, you know, every 3 month reports on, the nature of appointments and promotions and how, various governance structures of the university would be made available to various groups of auditors that would have to be chosen and approved by the government. I mean, this is a level of intervention that is not even imaginable in, the United States, in my opinion. It's an authoritarian intervention. And one can only hope and pray that the legal system will prevent it, or that they will pull back because they recognize that the public opinion is turning against them. But nobody knows.
Last question. I know you laid out the impact on the researchers and the research, but the trickle down impact on what President Garber called the health and well-being of millions. I
Yes,
mean,
yes.
do you think lives, I don't want to say, people will die, but the health of people is at risk as a result of this?
Yes, well, the health of people is at risk as a result of this because the major theme behind virtually all of the research that is carried out through NIH funding is to improve health. Some of the studies are done to improve health, over a period of several years. Some are much longer term to find the cause of disease and develop new therapies or to prevent diseases by various interventions. They're virtually all at some time scale addressing health. So unless you believe it was all for naught, which is nonsense, to prevent that research from taking place would be a threat to health.